let's talk about Bog Asphodel. This is Bog Asphodel. Now, I've talked about a regular asphodel before, and while they look somewhat similar, they're actually not that closely related. Now, true to the name, Bog Asphodel typically grows in bogs or other wetland areas like peat bogs or marshes and stuff like that, with pretty high acidity and low calcium. Now, Bog Asphodel is pretty common in many areas of Europe, and there is one species that is found on the east coast of North America around New Jersey, but most of its range is typically in European countries. Now, Bog Asphodel does have a couple of other names, including the bone breaker, which is not actually a thing that typically happens, but the kind of folklore around that is if sheep eat a lot of Bog Asphodel, they develop weak bones and the bones break more easily. Now, there is no correlation with the consumption of Bog Asphodel by sheep and having brittle bones. However, Bog Asphodel typically grows in calcium-poor conditions, and so those sheep may have actually developed a calcium deficiency from living in the same areas that Bog Asphodel grows, and it's not due to the plant itself, it's due to the conditions in which this plant grows. However, this is not to say that eating Bog Asphodel is completely harmless to sheep, because it is somewhat toxic, and with eating a whole lot of it can cause problems, including kidney and liver damage and a specific type of photosensitivity. Bog Asphodel does contain saponins, and as a whole, the saponin group of chemicals typically tend to be at least somewhat toxic. In specific, the saponins in Bog Asphodel interfere with the breakdown of a different chemical called phytoerythrin. This causes a buildup of the phytoerythrin in the sheep bloodstream, and that, in a roundabout chemical mechanism way, causes photosensitivity. This causes typically sheep, but also sometimes cattle who graze heavily on the Bog Asphodel to be more prone to sunburns and skin damage and all of those other issues that come with the photosensitivity. It also is considered to be toxic to humans as well, in the same way that it is for sheep and cattle, causing photosensitivity and, if large enough quantities, kidney damage. However, I don't think a lot of people are eating this. So as far as I am aware, there's been very few, if any, cases of acute or even chronic poisoning symptoms in humans. Now, interestingly, this is the fruit of the Bog Asphodel, and while it is still considered to be toxic, it apparently was historically used as a substitute for saffron to get that bright yellow color. However, I don't think that's done at all anymore due to the fact that it is still toxic. Another cool feature is that some populations of plants are more toxic than others. I think, to a degree, all of the Bog Asphodel plants are toxic: the flowers, the seeds, the stalks, the roots, all of that. However, some have been found to be way more toxic than others, and it's thought it's due to environmental conditions such as fungal infections. If the population of plants is affected by a fungal pathogen, they will become more toxic in order to defend themselves against that pathogen, which overall is just pretty neat.